Hey, this is Travis Gafford, the double lift expert, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel.
This is going to be episode 38 of Narrative Wake, a talk show about anything and everything in the world of League of Legends. That's a lie, actually. First of all, it's only about competitive League of Legends, not like all, like, actually, that's one thing I always notice I get wrong, is there are actually a lot of podcasts about League of Legends. It's just a lot of them are just about, like, casual play or, like, you know, more surface level stuff. But hopefully this is about competitive League of Legends, in-depth shit. We don't talk about any of the shit regions, except the ones that make loads of money and get us all the views and that, and most of the guests come from. But aside from those ones, we just stick to the really good shit. It's where that's a complete lie as well. We almost never talk about LCK on this show, but whatever. We'll do our best. We'll see if we can. We'll try and integrate it a bit more.
LPL is the best reason. That is what I hear every time I turn into the English broadcast of the LPL. Every caster.
That is what Froskurin has now gotten the balls up to finally tell people, and is now going super hard.
It's not just Frosk, it's literally every caster. It's like, so in LPL, the best region in the world, this and this and this happens, etc.
Well, luckily, we will definitely get into that topic on this episode, because, I mean, obviously the hubris, it's so perfect, because they're saying that after a tournament in which you just have this like joke format, and then obviously MSI where you only get the best. I think what they're forgetting is Korea gets 3 lottery tickets every time they go to Worlds, so the chances they're not going to win, I don't know about that. We'll see. Like,
what you're forgetting is that Rogue Warriors, a literal joke team, beat Kingzone, so that's a fun time. Anyway,
even though we won Rift Rivals, I'm going to revert back to saying it's a joke tournament. I don't really care about the results, but we'll get into that. So our guest for this one, I think at this point you must have come on the most, Loco. You must be the guest who's come on the most times, right?
Really?
It's maybe like 4 times now, maybe 5 times.
This one plus, what is it, Summoner's Insight?
Plus Summoner's Insight, I think you're killing it, yeah. I don't think anyone else has done it.
He was basically a third host for Summoning Insight. So
he was, yeah. Well, here's the thing. That was once floated as an idea. That was once discussed, potentially could have happened. But, I had to keep Montreal to myself. And also at that point in time, we barely did any shows, to be fair. It was like just getting a show done was hard enough, Kelsey. I couldn't be scheduling with 4 people. So
what you're saying is polygamy is a little too progressive for you.
I think marriage in general, it's just it's too far. I'm more conservative than you thought, Kelsey. Like, I don't want to go back to marriage. I want to go back to like the times where we just lived in a tribe, took mushrooms at the first light of a Lunam festival and fucked, and no one knew whose kids they were. That's where I want to go. So that
I'm sure there's festivals for that.
There probably is. I think Burning Man's a little bit like that. It's not too different. I don't really want to go though and be surrounded by a bunch of stinking hippies. Right. Anyway, to start this episode off, Loco, you did what no guest does that I appreciate. Is you actually came in with some topics you want to talk about. You didn't just come in as some blank slate and that we have to coax opinions out of. So one of the topics you wanted to talk about was a very topical one. It's the Rift Rivals tournament that we just had. We obviously had this. Let's just start here, Local, because we talked a bit about it as a preview on the last episode. I want to get your take on this. Obviously, every time Rift Rivals happens, because of its timing, that it's like, it's after MSI, but it's not as good as MSI, and then it's always when the season's just begun in each of the regions, so it's kind of got like an awkward placing. It's very easy for people to kind of dismiss it out of hand and say, oh, who cares about that? Like, it's an exhibition tournament, sure, maybe it has some good games, but it's not like a real tournament like Worlds and MSI. Where do you come down on that? What do you think about this?
I think the tournament itself is pretty legitimate, but it only has, I would say this is a key problem. It takes the best 3 or 4 teams from last year, which might not be the best teams like at the current state that they go. And I think like that gives it legitimate reasons to be somewhat dismissed. Because when I was checking out the European score, or what is it, the European standings after Rift Rivals, what the hell? There was an undefeated team that didn't come. So I was like, wow, that's really weird. And Splice was like somewhere in the bottom.
Yes.
Some would even say that because G2 played Misfits as soon as G2 came back, though, it's a bit awkward because G2 versus Misfits should have been an insanely high match, but obviously G2 is jet lagged and everything else. So theoretically, it could have gone either way. It was a pretty close game in general as well. So.
Okay. So what were your initial thoughts then of Rift Rivals Local? Because if you weren't watching EU LCS, and obviously we had you on actually when it was one of the episodes about the NA LCS, did you expect the EU teams to not be very good?
I heard. Well, I'll catch like little highlights of ULCS. I didn't really watch them, but in the past, like they've been pretty good. I didn't think they'd be like smashing good. I didn't think like NA would also like the metas like match up that badly.
Okay.
I thought it would be close to maybe EU wins, but I didn't think NA would be like getting smashed.
So this is one of the things that on the last episode we did, which was the preview for Rift Rivals, I actually did focus quite heavily around the context of, like, how is this team going to do in this meta? Like, we had a lot of meta discussion around it. So what's your take on the meta at the moment, Loco? What do you think of this meta that you saw at the Rift Rivals? And that obviously is very different from back in the day.
Meta overall right now is in one of the worst states it's been in, like, the last 4 years.
Which, according to what criteria? Like, what sense is it the worst?
Okay, so to start off, like with the biggest like perpetrator of all this is bot lane and ADCs. So ADC whining is like a huge thing, and when ADCs are weak, like they whine more than other classes. And also, like even with that, I think it's terrible that a class of champion just got literally like wiped off the face of the earth. League is a game with like really high barrier to entry. Like to play League, you have to learn a lot about League. You have to know a lot of the champions. You have to know how they interact. And there's so many champions. Yes. And then like you build up that information and you build up a library of, okay, when I play League of Legends, I can expect this. It's nice that there are certain like few changes, but there are some certain things that you learn. And when those things are broken, like the game feels really weird. So for anyone like that's been into League for even up to a year, or even up to a year, like for people that's been in League for much longer, it's super surprising and it's super annoying that there was a expectation of when I queue up for ADC, this is what I'm gonna get, this is what's gonna happen, these are the skills I'm gonna be judged on by queuing up for ADC. Is completely like abolished because like the things that make ADCs good in lane, like trade distance, like looking at people like trade patterns and stuff, like versus range ADC versus range ADC, like that's what you're trained on. Like that's like it's a very, very like narrow thing you're getting tested on when you play AD, and that's like completely gone. So I think that's terrible. And I also think funnel is like so terrible for the game. So in funnel, there's like two cases where funnel goes well, where funnel goes wrong. When funnel goes well, the winning team has some amount of fun and like the game is good for them, and the losing team feels terrible. You can't do shit. And when funnel loses, like it's not even that fun for the winning team. It's like beating a team that had like a person that wanted to AFK. So, and also like the terrible thing is, I thought Riot had the game in a really, really good direction. They're like, we're gonna abolish 2v1, even though it's good in competitive play and it gives it diversity. Right, like League of Legends should appeal to everyone, and pro play should be a huge advertisement tool for Riot. If what you see at LCS or LCK is different from what you experience when you play solo queue, there can be a disconnect between competitive play and actual play, and funnel does that, and it's also very unfun for like people playing it too. So
okay, right, there's a lot of stuff there.
Terrible state.
So let's go piece by piece here, Loco. So let's start with when you were saying that one of the reasons that you think that the meta's in a bad place is because picking a role like AD carry, it has changed like even the knowledge barrier.
It's like busted open.
Like when you say that, like League is like difficult to play. Obviously, people initially are going to think, well, that's crazy, compared to certain games that are like highly mechanical. It's not. But you were definitely right. One thing I've always told people, and this is actually one of the reasons why I think the esports side of League was never that popular when compare how many total players there are in the world to how many people who actually watch, is because the actual barrier in just terms of knowledge barrier is insane in League. You have to know all these champions, all the matchups, how different roles work. Now you don't in theory. There's obviously plenty of people watching who don't understand like how jungle works, for example. But as a result, they're getting a much worse product. Like they're not understanding what's going on. They're making very weird judgments. They're probably not even appreciating certain genius moves that someone's pulling off just because they don't play that role. They don't play at a high level. Maybe they don't know that specific. They might even play jungle but not know that specific champion matchup, so they don't really know is someone ahead here. I've always thought League actually had the most sort of hidden context of any esports game I've ever seen, actually, because even in things like Counter-Strike, you can kind of tell by the weaponry who's in an advantage in a certain scenario, or if someone did something that was exceptionally amazing. You know, sometimes in League, a lot of the subtle things you actually can't even know in the moment. You know, you see an expert, if he goes back over the VOD, I just noticed this here. So I definitely agree on that one. But Kelsey, coming on this one, what do you think of this aspect of it, like being ADC specific, though? Because on the one hand, you've obviously made the case on a bunch of the episodes you talked about this, that you absolutely can still just play AD carry. I mean, you go and look in the LCK, there's a bunch of teams just play AD carries. But in a sense, his point still works in as much as if you're playing AD carry against Vladimir or fucking a Bruiser, like that is going to be a matchup you've also never played. So where do you come down on the ADC angle?
I think a lot of the champions that are being flexed bot, mid and top, and this is a point that I didn't necessarily make on previous episodes, are just broken. Like, they're just so good that you can play them wherever and they're going to be objectively better than other champions in most of those roles. So I think...
And is that like the Vladimirs, the Heimerdingers of the world? Is this the sort of champions you're talking about?
Stuff like that. So like the Vladimir, the Swain, previously Aurelia. The Aurelia is not that bad of a position now. So those champions are just like going to be better in general than a lot of the other champions. Whereas I feel like if you want an objectively well-rounded composition, you're going to play AD. Regardless of what you choose to play, you're going to have to change your knowledge in terms of matchups, and you're going to have to change like what you're going to do in lane. So say you're playing traditional AD carries. First of all, your itemization changed, so you have to worry about that.
Oh, I think, oh my God. I also think that was really bad.
Yeah.
Like, there has to be certain rules, like, to items and, like, what they do. And when they flip that on you completely for no reason, like, it's just, oh my God, what, like,
why? Saya is one of the best examples because her first item is so awkward now. Because before, Essence Reaver worked really well. And now it's like, okay, Essence Reaver, Storm Razor, all of these sort of, in some cases, work, but not really. Like, all of these items sort of give her what she wants, but not exactly. And then you're basically just waiting for your third item again. It's a really strange situation because I don't necessarily think that, okay, they thought that we need to have a first item for all champions. They just thought, okay, we're going to make a couple of good first items. And then we don't necessarily care if these first items are still useful as the game goes on. So a lot of ADCs feel like, say we buy Storm Razor first item. Oh, suddenly, like 30 minutes into the game, I feel like I only have 2 items again because 40 minutes of the game, I feel like I only have 2 items again because Storm Razor is such a useless item at this point.
The first item, I think, should give some survivability to the AD. I hate like how almost all like the most efficient AD builds are completely glass cannon. So if you get like nicked, you're like just out of the fight, and it's so hard and so punishing to buy anything but damage items. Like, it's really punishing to try to get lifesteal, like 900 gold away, and it's so punishing to buy QSS because you're like just fixated into getting 3 items with IE, and if you don't get it in that order, and like the longer you delay it, like the worse and worse it is for you.
And that's why some of the best ADs are obviously Bork champions.
Like non-crit ADs. Like Israel, and like until recently, like Israel, Lucian, Jin, like I think those were the, because they're not bound to like you must get these 3 items first,
and then
be useless.
Jin even had like a bug with one of the items that is supposed to be good on him on release, so it's just kind of a mess, honestly. So I do think that there's the ADC item patch almost felt rushed and not well thought out. And then on the other, also Riot tried to say that this is what we intended. Like, after the fact, we intended to open up bot lane, but really their initial messages were not about that at all. So I don't necessarily even feel like this itemization patch was focused or thoughtful or anything. It was just kind of like, we're going to shake some stuff up, and maybe this happens, but maybe it doesn't.
I think opening up bot lane was like unneeded. I thought bot lane was fine where it was, and ADCs like don't need to go into different lanes.
I don't necessarily think that was. I don't necessarily. So on the one hand, I think having basically the fact that the only other champions that I think are actually good bot are basically just OP. just speaks to other balance changes, but I don't necessarily think the idea of non-ADC spot is extremely bad for the game, because obviously ADC mains have practiced this, they're used to this, they're comfortable with this, and they're practicing this, but this is because Riot made this design decision, or has made this design decision in the past, and has like continued to eventually just, okay, we're going to enforce this design decision. We're going to have like roles and solo queue, et cetera, et cetera. But
right, so you were referring there to the famous thing where they used to say we don't actually acknowledge a meta in League of Legends.
Yeah.
So in theory, anyone can play anything they want. But obviously, that was a statement from many years ago, and they definitely have walked that back the last few years. And in fact, now you see the patch notes; they explicitly say we want the jungle to do this. We want, they kind of have abandoned that to some degree.
Right.
Yeah.
And the fact that they've finally accepted that design decision, and they were kind of enforcing it, and now they're saying no. We want things to be open is bad, of course. But the question is, like, should it have been that way? Or is it just like an idea that Riot was incompetent at balancing or at bringing something that they wanted in the first place, or that should have been good for the game in the first place? And if it had been this way the whole time, do you think it would be good? Like, if it had been this way where it's like more open in the bot lane the whole time, do you think that would have been a good thing?
Like, basically, Loco, if it had been something like Dota where you can play stuff all over the place, and would that have been a better if we just didn't have the past 6-7 years of League and it was always like this and was just the world we lived in?
Sure, then it would have been more fine, because then you wouldn't have the expectation that I'll play ADCs in bot lane, so that expectation isn't getting broken. But Riot's changing so much things about the game that's been like fundamentally core and that people fundamentally enjoy about League of Legends. Like for jungle, for example, I think jungle is best when these kind of champions are the most popular. Lee and Elise, I think are they show and they like truly mean what a good jungle champion looks like and what a good meta looks like. It's really varied, and you put on a lot of pressure, and there's a lot of player-to-player combat.
Yes.
If you look at current jungle, it's like Talia, Graves, Nidalee, like these are the things that are popular. It's mostly about clearing, and it's mostly about tempo and speed. Like those things matter during the Lee Elise meta too, but those things were the most important, or those things are the most important now. So I just think meta's been in such a bad spot. Like initially when the Scuttle changes happened, only junglers that could get level 2 extremely quickly and only junglers that were strong at level 2 really mattered. And I thought level 3 was a really good like checkpoint for that. Like you want to farm till level 3, and if you don't fast farm till level 3, and anything you try before level 3 can have high risk, but now it's at level 2 and it's only about very like select few champions. So it's just so weird and different for no reason. Like people didn't have like problems with it. Like Lee Sin is still one of the most highly played jungler despite his like shitty win rate. So yeah, I'm not sure how to feel, because you were like sold this idea when you play ADC, like this is what you're gonna get. And the really great thing about like ADC support, and also just about support in general, was it made it so easy for anyone to get into the game. Like I think one of the greatest...
I think that's the easiest way to get in the game is to play support. That's why famously so many people have come into League of Legends who are casual players, I think.
So you know what the greatest thing about League of Legends is? It pulls from so many genres of people. I think like 10 years ago, to be a gamer, like the average gamer probably would have been like very, very nerdy, and there was a huge barrier into like going and buying like a PC and like paying like $60-80 to play a game, and the graphics are very like realistic looking, or more towards realistic and more bloody. Like girls don't want to play that, younger kids don't want to play that, but League of Legends has such a wide appeal because it's free to play. There's an easy position to get into support, and the graphics and like how the characters look and some of the personalities, it appeals to everyone. It doesn't matter if you're like a small girl. Like League of Legends usually is probably going to be your first like serious PC game, or like you're a 20-year-old or a 30-year-old. Like super hardcore gamers that are into esports and that love the competitive side can get into it, and super casual gamers that might not like be a hardcore gamer can get into it. And when like all these things gets changed, and like when it appealed to everyone, like now it's I don't know how to I just feel very badly about the meta, and I know I probably have like emotional attachments to it because I've been playing League for a long time, and I expect the meta to be in a certain way, and maybe newer players are more open to it, but I think it's really turned the game upside down for a lot of players.
I think one thing, what bothers me more isn't necessarily the AD carry mains have to change like their approach to the game and learn like all these new champions, or at least how to play against all these new champions, and then like the situation, all the stuff. Is just that how rapid the changes have been.
Yeah, and it's not even like a like a season patch. What do you call it?
Preseason patch.
Yeah, preseason patch or anything like that. It's during like important times.
Yeah, it's just like continuously every 2 weeks, and then on top of that, we get micro patches or hot fixes, right? So one thing that has bothered me probably more than all of this is just they release a champion, people are playing it and initially the win rate is super bad because they don't understand the champion. So within like 2 days, it's hotfix buffed.
Yes.
And then this champion is just completely baller out of control, has to be banned every game. And then it's like people were whining when new Aatrox was released because it wasn't old Aatrox, and old Aatrox was strong. New Aatrox comes out, and then people are playing it, and the people who kind of like understand it are realizing this champion is super strong. But like a lot of people play it, don't understand the champion because it's not like old Aatrox, and they don't know how to play it. And then they're like feeding in their games. The win rate is super bad. They put 2 hot fixes within like 3 days to buff this champion, and now it's just the most disgusting thing on the face of the planet. Like,
you know what
like
the problem?
This happens.
You know what the problem is? League of Legends is a hard game to pick up. Even individual champions, there's so much depth to learning it, and there's no good ways to learn it. Like League of Legends, like I think the guide system and like people just teaching stuff is very, very like few and like low quality. So I think it's really hard to like learn a new champion. If you wanted to go and learn Aatrox, like I actively had to go and learn mid and top a lot and jungle because I was not having fun time like playing bot lane, and I realized like outside of like the base knowledge I have, like all the in-depth things, like it's really hard to pick up. You have to like individually research, and people don't want to do that. So the gap of knowledge and is really, really big for a lot of the champions people play.
And I do think a point that's been brought up is that the frequent patch changes actually hurt the casual player base.
Yes,
when it's supposed to help them, right? It's supposed to keep the game fresh and interesting, and it's like you don't get bored of the game, you keep coming back because it's different every time. But then people are like, oh my god, I've spent like a month away from the game because I was focusing on my studies, and how much shit do I have to relearn? Like, it's people are not liking that.
Imagine you're a casual ADC player. Like after a month or two, you come back, you're like, holy shit, my jungler's trolling. Like he's playing Talia. You lock in your favorite champion, whatever, Draven, Caitlyn, whatever champion that might be. You buy first item, IE, and then you realize, holy fuck, like I bought the wrong item. Like I almost always like first buy this. Like it doesn't give me any crit chance. It doubles my crit chance. Now I have 0% crit chance. Like so many things just dramatically changed where it's you need to constantly keep up. And like what is this funnel bullshit? Like what is this like Swain Vladimir bottom bullshit?
Right,
just change on top of change.
So you also referenced the funnel aspect, right? On the one hand, one of the things I didn't like about the meta was that you saw so many AD carries. Some of them were benched, some of them just seemed to have a hard time. In a way, Kelsey, whether you like it or not, hasn't funnel in a way sort of offset the problems of ADC though? Because I see like the carries of a lot of the teams have been the AD carries. Like they've been the ones that get the funnel basically. You think about Sven in TSM, Double Lift, Altec. These are the guys who get the funnel. So hasn't that in a way offset some of their complaining?
But
Sort of
bad.
But yeah, funnel is bad. Like the issue is that funnel is something that, especially with the last patch, it's just way too counterable. And even when it came out, like there were obvious ways to counter it. And when it was starting to have success, there were obvious ways to counter it. And so now that
what are the most
more and more people
ones?
have free, I mean, you get a strong jungle and a mid that can 2v2 early, and then the funnel doesn't get off the ground, basically. And then you just play out the game fairly cleanly. Basically, the way funnel wins is the other team screws up. Like the non-funnel team screws up in a big way, and then the funnel wins. And so any time you're playing something like that relies on an enemy team to screw up, it's just bad.
So like funnel and solo queue, it's so bad for the team playing on the side of funnel. Like say I'm a bot laner like playing against funnel. I don't know what the hell is going on in mid and jungle, and whatever goes on in mid and jungle will decide my fate as bot lane. Like if our funnel like does it well and their funnel or their 2v2 fucks up, then they're gonna lose. And they have to purposely know like how to play versus funnel. And I have to play bot lane without having a jungler that's gonna come to my lane. Like their team's gonna have a jungler, like they're gonna play more aggressively, and it's just miserable like being there and watching. And when funnel is popular and people are trying it in solo queue, it affects so many people, and it's just so bad for the overall player base.
So, okay, Kelsey, I mean, it's obviously a paradigm shift. Are we not just going to get somewhere in a month from now? Well, I mean, I know they're already changing the jungle stuff, but anyway, imagine we stayed with the same meta. Would we not just find out a safe way to do it or a more reliable way to do it in a month from now?
You mean a more reliable way to do funnel?
Yes.
Or a more reliable way to counter? I mean, potentially, but I don't necessarily think you change the fundamentals of it. I think a lot of the details have changed. Stuff like the materializers, stuff like how we're using our support and when the support runs independently, stuff like this has changed. But at the same time, the fundamental thing is you're just playing without a jungler, and that changes the way your side lanes have to play the game, and it changes the way that you have to play the game. And I think it's much more likely that the technology and how to counter it advances rather than the technology of how to play it advances. And just because the game has been a certain way in terms of setup and the jungle and optimization, it just makes way more sense to have a jungler who's farming.
Okay.
Because like super late game, non-funnel wins, and super early game, non-funnel wins. So you basically have to wait for teams. You have to have like an insane carry ahead of them in mid game and then close on that. And it's such a weird setup in general that I think the only region where it has gotten more popular in the past 2 weeks is NA. Basically, every other region has slowed down on playing it, partly because junglers were buffed, like junglers that can counter it, junglers that are strong early and can like have a huge impact. There are more junglers like that now, and so I think that makes it a lot harder to play funnel as well. So
then let me ask you the naive question then, is if it's counterable and it's not that good anyway and the regions are sort of abandoning doing it anyway, then what's the problem? Just let idiots do it and then good teams don't do it. Isn't that problem solved?
And partly, I guess like the other issue is that good teams do it against bad teams, right?
Right.
So like if good teams are doing it against bad teams, that just feels really crummy as well to watch. As a viewer, and also to like in solo queue to play as well, probably. So
okay,
because it originated as a boosting strat, right? It originated fundamentally as like high elo players smurfing to level up accounts and sell them. Like that's how it originated.
And you know how Riot talks about like they don't like Smurf because they don't like the kind of gameplay experience it creates.
Sure.
And like they actively try to prevent people from smurfing, and they actively don't support smurfing. Funnel does the exact same thing. It promotes like a terrible gameplay experience for everyone involved.
And it was developed by boosters, like boosters literally doing this type of thing in high elo because they know that at low elo, people can't counter what they're doing, and they can.
When it's not popular, people don't know what to do against it.
Yeah. So I think that that's more of the issue. I don't necessarily think that. I think that if Riot nerf it, it's good for the general player base, but pro play is not necessarily necessary.
So why I also don't think it's bad for play, or why I think it's bad for pro play, and why I think like overall like Rift Rivals, and I feel really weirdly about the meta, is we think of like teams being good as like how well do you play in this like setting, and like we've been consistently like judging teams on that, and now it's about like prepping draft, it's about like countering other person's draft, and like there being like some kind of back and forth. It's settled down a lot, but I think for like the last 2 months it's been more so about not countering what you're doing and not really thinking about what you're doing, but just figuring out my strategy and figuring out what strategy is best for my team and executing mine. And there wasn't a lot of interaction like back and forth about, oh, they're going to play this kind of strat, we should play against it this way. There has to be a lot of skill Like, it was more so about, we're a really good funnel team and we're gonna like run funnel and we're gonna do it well and you're gonna lose. Like, we're a really good like bottom Vladimir team and we're gonna run it well and like you're gonna lose. And just wasn't like very interactive back and forth, and more so like games were so stompy because of that, in my opinion. And I think like the last 2 months, like even the viewing experience, like there's the initial excitement of things being different, but it's just hard to keep track of like, oh, this team won because of this. It's just, everything is so different so quickly.
Yeah, you have players like Wild Turtle who have a ridiculous amount of games on Yasuo, so he can run it bot and they can do something like that off of it, but other teams can't necessarily do that kind of thing, or have that success, or don't know how to play against Yasuo bot. So you get insanely lopsided games even at the pro level from that kind of experience.
Right, let's transition this to Rift Rivals then. So Loco, we addressed before, obviously you're not following EU LCS super in depth. What did you actually think to tie this in then? So one of the things that I know Kelsey's very critical of is that the NA teams are the ones that seem still obsessed with doing the funnel, and we saw it at this Rift Rivals here. A bunch of the teams still went down that path. What did you think of, like, starters on Rift Rivals? Where would you start? Which team do you want to discuss first?
The NA being obsessed with funnel is, NA is a team where there's disproportionate level of mechanical and knowledge between the players. I think the best, like on average, like the best NA players compared to the worst NA players in the LCS like ecosystem itself probably has the highest gap than like say Korea or China or even Europe. Like the best European player is not like 10 miles better than the worst European player, but in NA, like the best, like the most top class NA LCS players like Double, Bjerg, who else, like Huni, like compared to like the worst NA LCS players, like the gap is so huge and so big. Like funnel is like fundamentally like going to be stronger in NA.
Okay. So similar to what Kelsey said, then it's just good teams running it against bad teams.
And there's also stylistically like teams like EchoFox and Optic like that love funnel, and that probably has a preference for funnel that makes it popular in NA. And because a lot of people are doing it, like you also try to do it too if you lose to it.
Okay. And EchoFox are actually pretty bad at it, because they end up losing their entire map and having to come back from behind playing it. So it's just really weird seeing this type of situation set up with funnel and the popularity of funnel. And they do it with so many different combinations. It kind of reminds me of Snake the LPL team, who literally benched their AD carry for a second support player. So they've advertised that they will do funnel every single game. So they found like all sorts of permutations under which they could run funnel. Today they unbenched their AD carry, so that was positive, I guess. But they were doing it with like Nautilus. They were doing it with Mordekaiser. These as support champions, but they were doing it with Nautilus mid and Mordekaiser mid, and like all of these sorts of support setups. Aurelia carry, all these other weird situations. Olaf carry, like they had all these sorts of weird things that they were funneling into as well. So, like if you play other games, like for Hearthstone, right? Like right after an expansion happens, like all the decks are not like really ranked and like everything's really random. And I mean, you have to like just figure out what's good better than other people. And League of Legends has never been about that. League of Legends, if you figure out things faster than other people, great, you'll get an initial advantage. But people will be given time to adapt. Like League of Legends is infamous for having like long ass tournaments. Like World Championships is 1 month long. Like 1 month long. It's literally 1 month long. Like most tournaments are like done in a weekend. Ours is like a month long. So it's traditionally a game that has awarded like good adaptation over a course of period, not like surprise tactics, not like it's not like a short test, it's like a long test. And it's, oh my god, I just feel so strongly about current meta being really weird and wonky. And also the rankings of the team, like this might be the like actual rankings of the team, and it's not people getting lucky, but teams are getting tested on something so differently than they've been tested on in like the last 5 years.
So, okay, since we already opened the Echo Fox topic, let's talk about this team, because obviously this is another one of the teams where who knows if they would have been here if you'd have actually gone off NA LCS standings, because they've been fairly rocky in the NA LCS. At Rift Rivals, they lost tons of games. I know they won that one against G2 in the final, so that looked good. Right? Whenever I watched them play, this just looked like it was like fucking Dardoch 1v9 the whole tournament. Like, this didn't look like a very good team. What do you think of them, Kelsey?
I think it's really weird that they'd be a team that gravitates towards funnel, generally speaking, because I feel like they have an advantage in that they do have a really strong or surprising jungler. And if enemy teams play funnel against you, like not necessarily having the optimal pathing is the best, but being able to surprise people and throw your sidelines off and throw your mid lane off is like really effective. So I would think that they'd be a team that would be really effective in playing against funnel. They're also not a team that has the best mid or late game setups, which are really fundamental in playing funnel. So I thought it was just really weird that they were playing this, and they haven't.
Dardoch loves playing support champs. Like on his alt accounts, like he'll play a lot of Recon, and like he loves playing support champs. So like it kind of plays into it. Like it seems weird that Dardoch would like playing support, but he actually does like playing support.
And I think a lot of pros like weirdly just like playing support because it's like that's what the fill role, right? So that they just kind of like relax when they're playing solo queue when they get auto filled, you know. But I do think that it's weird to me because Echo Fox don't have the fundamentals that seem to resonate well with funnel or funnel type teams. And overall, I think that shows. I don't necessarily think Dardoch's Alistair, for example, was particularly good. So I was much happier to see him like on Kindred, right? And much happier to see him playing these types of aggressive style junglers and winning games for Echo Fox that way. And I think that helped them when they switched to that in Rift Rivals. So, it's just a really weird setup and situation. I think that at the moment it feels like NA played standard for a while and now they're almost late to the fad where it's like, oh my God, the meta is completely different. And so they're just trying a bunch of different things that they see other regions try without necessarily understanding why or in what situations they work. So I think that that's why NA is a bit of a mess. And I think that type of fad hit directly like the week before Rift Rival started. And that's why I almost feel like that on top of the sub situation didn't necessarily represent what I would say NA as a region could bring to the table. Not that I think that they would have won Rift Rivals naturally or anything like that, but it felt much more lopsided because of that.
I think NA should inherently be... I think NA has the potential to be better than Europe, and in a way, like it's more favored to be better than Europe because it imports more heavily, like not just from Europe, but from Korea also. Like Europe's very low on Korean imports now too.
Yeah, that makes us better, by the way. But yeah, Europe makes us like not having a huge reliance on Korean imports.
NA has just a wider pool of like people to draw from, and
yeah, but that also means that you just draw randomly from some people that don't necessarily do well, and you value Koreanness more than you value like actual game skill sometimes.
I mean, to be fair, he didn't say they were better. I think he's just implying the ceiling is higher if you have some amazing Korean player, but obviously they haven't integrated them very well.
The reality is that like I think EU, there are a lot of EU teams that have like higher budgets now. That could have imported more heavily if they wanted to, but they saw value in having like rosters that all speak English. They saw value in having like drawing from a player base that they understand it from players, like their players all play together. They know what to expect from these players. They know what a team will look like when they put this team together. So I do think that it's not that like you couldn't import or that they were unable to draw from the import net. It's just that they saw that it's just that they found value in their existing player base, which I think is fine. So
I think it's like a twofold thing where you don't import, then you have to naturally put money into growing your own players, which you did like so much better than NA. And with NA Academy, I think NA is gonna solve that problem like bit by bit, like growing more homegrown NA players.
Right,
But-
which I think the National League system has always been like a boon for the EU scene relative to the NA scene. So yeah, I agree with that.
I think it's so weird though, where how sometimes NA teams will build rosters is they'll build it on the back of imports, and it's really hard to get like import really incorporated. And I think you can count on your fingers like how many few have incorporated well. Not just Koreans, like Europeans. There are certain European players that are good when they come over and they don't do as well and they go back. But I think like an import is used really well when you have overall very well-rounded team, but a one like lacking position that's not very communication based, or the whole team can mold to it, and then you insert the import there. But recently people have just been building on the back of imports, and they're like, okay, we have this import player. Like, how do we get the best players around them, not the other way around?
I had one question that was related to this Echo Fox team at Rift Rivals before we move on to some of the other teams. So this is the question, right? In that last game when Dardoch played Evelyn, right? I went and checked all the other regions, and even the ones I haven't been watching at all. It doesn't seem like that champion is almost ever played right now in the current metas. So is this going to be like, was it like a one-off pick for him? Is it something that's going to come out? It looked pretty good when he was playing it.
I think right now Evelyn is fine situationally. So yeah, I mean, it's just like, I don't necessarily have a problem with that as much as a bunch of other things that they did, you know. So
I honestly have no idea how it's gonna be. I know it's like a really stylish pick, and people love playing it. Like the junglers themselves love playing Evelyn. So we'll see how it goes. Like, maybe it's not a pick that everyone will play, that's for sure. But it is a pick that more people could pick up.
Okay, right, Loco. What did you think of Team Liquid at this tournament? Didn't win many games, mate.
I honestly didn't get to watch the tournament that in depth. I saw finals, and I also saw when I saw how bad NA lost, I went and checked out some of the European teams more closely.
Okay.
So I don't want to have an opinion on something I'm not too hyper detailed on.
Tell us what you can talk about then. What would be a good topic to talk about Rift Rivals in this sense?
I think Korea losing again is
right. So we're going to switch to the Asian one then. Okay, so we haven't actually talked about that at all on the show. So start us off then. Korea losing again at Rift Rivals, which you did say before, in a sense, is a meaningful tournament. So what does this mean for us, Loco? Is it panic stations? They've lost MSI. They've lost Rift Rivals. Should we be worried?
I'm somewhat, I guess. Like, I think it's I always, in a way, thought, you know, the same way I talked about NA, I always thought like China has the infrastructure and the player base to be the best region in the world, and the fact that they're behind speaks a lot to Koreans. And like China doing well is like, I think you have to credit like the Chinese teams like themselves doing well. Like, they're not doing it well on backup imports. I think they just play really well, and like the current meta really suits like high mechanical players and like innovative strategies a lot. I guess I'm less like shocked that Korea getting toppled happened in this meta due to how non-traditional it is. If like the meta stayed more stable and like Korea got toppled, I think it'd be much more worrying, and it'd be much more, not that this one isn't legitimate, but it'd much be more like heavy and more like weighing.
So how do you talk about MSI then?
Chinese did better, like, or what else to say?
The Chinese
RNG
did better, yeah.
Yeah, I mean RNG did better, so.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the way that he explained it is that if you think about if China could harness their player base,
yes,
then they should be better theoretically, right?
We'll put it this way, Kelsey. One thing that often, anyone who's watched the LPL, obviously you'll be fully aware of this, one of the most disappointing things about the LPL is how few big blockbuster trades there were. Admittedly, in the latter years there were, because a lot of the old stars did move on and wanted to play. But during their peaks, you would have amazing teams where you'd think, why is this one position, you know, not that sick, or why can they never find someone? And then you'd go and look at like some LSPL team that had like a player who you'd think, fucking hell, why isn't he on their team, you know? And it was all the politics and the whole bizarre scenario where a lot of players, in at least for the prime of League in the years past, were kind of like lifers. They were just on that team forever, and they're either on that team on the bench or a starting player, you know, and you didn't get as much kind of traffic. So in that sense, I mean, it always has seemed weird to me that they never really did sort of make use of the talent, but it's in a sense that's because they're not thinking collectively. Like they're not all like gathered together. Like, we are China, we must make the best 3 teams. You know, each team's thinking individually. Like, well, why the fuck would I let this player go if I don't want to? And we don't have the same free agent market we do in EU, NA, etc. So, in a sense, it makes it there's practical. I mean, I wouldn't say pragmatic because I'm not sure they are pragmatic, but there's practical reasons as to why the talent's underused in China, right?
Yeah, and loyalty, I mean, culturally also loyalty is very different, I think, in China, because it's like...
Oh yeah, the whole WEEDG like scandal, right? Like,
yeah, if you leave a team, it's like you betrayed them, or a lot of players are like, OMG always had the philosophy that if we hire this player, we have a job for him, you know, when he retires, which has like some positives to it, but also some negatives, and it makes like it very difficult for player trades to occur. Stuff like, when people in NA were having huge scandalous outrage about 3-year contracts, China had 5-year contracts and no one was paying attention. It was like, well, we are making an investment in this player for 5 years. So it was just a very different idea. But
the contracts are weird. So when in traditional sports, right, like NFL or NBA, when a team signs like a player for 5 years, at least in NBA, not always in NFL, you're signing for somewhat of a guaranteed money, right? And if a team wants to bench you early, then it's actually beneficial.
All the money, yes. If you're the NBA, famously, even if you get injured, you get all the money. Yeah, for the player, it makes sense.
It's beneficial. Like that's why they commit to it. But in League, I haven't heard of salaries being guaranteed. And if you get cut early, then you're just cut early. And if you want to leave early, well, then the team that wants to get you has to pay a buyout. So long contracts and other sports mean stability, while in League of Legends, I don't think long contracts necessarily mean stability for players.
Stability. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say that stability isn't necessarily a good thing with how much salaries fluctuate as well in the current climate.
Well, the funny thing is, this is actually a parallel to what happens in Counter-Strike at the moment, because one of the really bad aspects of Counter-Strike is that because we have an open circuit, so you're getting tested in terms of like the feedback of how well your team does every month, basically, people very rapidly realize if their team's going in the direction they want or not. And so the problem is, in Counter-Strike, you don't even usually last a year with one lineup unless you're the absolute best team in the entire world. And even then, unless you win all the time, you know, you might still want to upgrade one player. So in Counter-Strike especially, we have a big problem at the moment that everyone out there is signing 2-year contracts, and yet literally 95% of the scene is going to either need to recruit a player themselves, or you know, a player's going to want to leave. And so we're in a mad scenario where there are plenty of really good teams who can't get the player they want, and this player is stuck on a team that's worse, and he has to either wait for a team to buy him out, or, you know, it's like the same scenario. Well, the problem is, the reason why that doesn't change is because, again, the player naively thinks what Loco's saying, like, oh, it's better for me to have a long contract, you know, I've got a security, whereas he doesn't realize actually it doesn't work in either way. If you're really good, you want a short contract so you can get your value again every year, and if you're really bad, you also want a short contract so that now you're not just really bad and sat on a bench, but someone has to pay a lot of money for you, because that's very unlikely to happen. You know, the sort of team that you want to pick you up if you're doing badly is a team that probably doesn't have as much money as your current team. So it's actually a bad scenario all around. Now, the problem is, the same reason I imagine it happens in China as to why it does in CSGO is because that's just the market. Everyone signs these contracts. And so as a player, unless you were like the best player in the world, you can't really negotiate otherwise. So in China, if I had to guess, every player when he's 15 just has to sign that contract because he's not a player yet. So everyone just ends up locked into these contracts. And by the time we know they're the superstar who should go to another team or get a better deal, it's too late. That's 2 years into a 5-year contract, you know.
Yeah, in some situations, like as a new player, I'd almost always rather join a decent, like a middle of the pack LSPL team than a crappy LPL team, because you're almost more likely to have better career trends, like because you're stuck to this team for so long, and maybe the LSPL team gets better, but the crappy LPL team doesn't. Those types of situations. So that's kind of almost how I felt when I would see really, really good players on bottom tier LPL teams, because you have situations where they're getting noticed and they're getting public praise, but their career is probably over. It was just such a weird situation.
It has to go back and forth because, like, right now when players are stuck on a team with a longer contract and that player wants to leave, it's actually...
Put the mic a bit closer to your mouth. Yeah, there we go.
When a player is on a team with like a longer contract, like a 3 to 4 year contract, and they want to leave, they just expect that they can leave. They feel like, oh, I'm in contract prison, I'm just going to talk about it and I can leave. They should respect like what they signed, but also the contract should be better where they do get guaranteed money. And if you're signing a long term, like both parties are like putting a lot of things like up front and like being like knowing what's going on. So I think League and other games have a lot to mature in that sense.
Okay. So when you had that topic, Loco, of like Korea versus the world, so obviously we can tie it to Rift Rivals in a sense, because yes, they have lost MSI, they've lost Rift Rivals. How much of the actual meta stuff would you put down to it? Like, do you think China was catching up anyway?
Yeah, I think the meta stuff, it definitely has a huge part. Like, you don't even have to just look at Korea. Look at Europe, Korea, China. You can look at all the regions, and there's been a huge shift of like teams that were bad that became suddenly good, and teams that were good that suddenly became bad. This year is much more different than other years. Like if you just look at Korea specifically, Kingzone like dipping down and like Griffins like shooting like way up is like Korea itself is really different. And there's like things like Reckles benching himself and like Reckles not playing that has to significantly...
I forgot Loco still calls him Reckles. I love that he does, that he's the only one who continued from like 2013 onwards, and the rest of us all just gave in. Because I agree, by the way, it should be Reckles. Like, sorry, it's an English word. Like, there's no word in Swedish called Reckles. But I just want to reference that, Loco. I do love that you still call it that.
If I'm pronouncing wrong, I'm sorry, Reckles.
I like it. Keep going.
But like him like benching himself and him not playing like after all these years and still being like a really top European carry, and when fans tune in, like they're gonna expect to see him, So I think the current like meta disarray has definitely affected the entire world, not just Korea. But I do give a lot of credit to China catching up, and I think NA and Europe will catch up a lot more with franchising, and hopefully as things become more stable.
Right, Loco, being as... Oh, sorry, do you have something, Kelsey?
I was just gonna say on a aside on that point, I think he's even acknowledged that the proper pronunciation is Reckles, but he just prefers people say Reckless. Yes. So yeah,
I always just agreed to do it because it's like saying that he wrecks less. So I was fine.
All right, Reckless. Yeah, I'll try to. Oh my god, I've been saying it this year for like I don't know how long now. It's gonna be really hard for me to fix that.
It's all right. Right, here's the question, Loco. So, is it a concern for you that not only did Kingzone Dragon X lose MSI, and obviously had some like actually upsets beyond just the final that were kind of unacceptable for a potential, best Korean team in the world. Then you went to the Rift Rivals. Obviously that went terribly. And now even in LCK, like they're definitely not a bad team, but they're not the dominant team they were there. Has something happened to this team? Because obviously people will know you have a connection to this team, obviously through Gorilla, a friend of yours from many years ago, teammate. Why do you think that this team has problems internationally?
I haven't been talking to them as much with, I guess, like not being as involved in competitive league anymore, and just, I haven't been talking to them.
Do you have a theory?
Also, I guess this is a hard team for me to like imagine being bad because everyone on their team is individually so good.
Sure.
Kelsey or Thorin, do you guys have any theories?
I have some thoughts. One thing is that when I think it was the first series they played where they did this insanely horrible trade against Gen G, where they do this swap where everyone goes top and then Gen G reacts, and it's immediately like a quadra kill and within the first 5 minutes, and it's just like really bad setup in general, regardless of meta. Then you watch their game today, where they're playing Zillion Sejuani bottom lane, and I don't think Gorilla hit like the proportion of ultimates he hit was just really poor, and it was just like, oh, okay, we can sort of flex this Sejuani pick if we get a bad jungle matchup. Here, Gorilla, you play it. You know, that type of situation seems almost plausible. It just seems like that they are really lost on how they want to play right now. Would be my big thing. And then maybe the part that they were thrown off by how MSI went, the fact that playing to top and then isn't necessarily consistently working every time. Like, a lot of these picks get flexed bot, and then you have to play to bot. Like, if they start out playing Mordekaiser comps, you have to play hard to bot with those comps. And that obviously wasn't working for them. So
I'm going to guess you included think that Prey was the best ADC in the world before MSI?
Yeah, prior to MSI, I actually thought Prey was... I was on the fence because I think that Prey is the more well-rounded ADC, but UZI just like has more...
Yes.
He was playing out of his mind. So
the champions back then, like during that meta, especially Kai'Sa, was so good for Uzi and so good for hard carry players.
Okay.
You know one thing though, it's kind of off topic, but not so much. I think League, when we talk about like teams like Kingzone and like we have such huge expectation for them, like for them to be dynasty teams for such a long time.
Sure.
I think League spoiled itself all across the world with like dynasty teams, and we have like ridiculous expectations. Like for Korea, like most notably SKT, for NA, most notably TSM. Like people talk about it lightly, but it's insane that TSM made every single final for like what 4 or 5 years.
Sure.
It's an insane record, and like we got spoiled, and we got an idea of like a dynasty team. Like in Europe, like Fnatic doing insanely well for such a long time, Alliance doing insanely well for such a long time, and like that Fnatic roster, like the Huni Reignover Fnatic roster, along with like XPK Fnatic roster, like Fnatic had just had a long dynasty of success, and even in China with like the old school World Elite and EDG. We gotten like whenever like we have a number one team, like for even a little bit while, we're like, oh, this is the next dynasty. They're so good. Like, how long are they going to be? Are they going to be even better than the last dynasty?
Sure.
Like, that's just been the base League of Legends fan mindset, and like we've been incredibly spoiled by all these dynasty teams. I think it's amazing and great that happened, but we hold that same kind of expectation for every team. Like that's been first for a while, and that's like Kingzone is somewhat victim to that, and I think Korea is so happy to that.
I mean, in terms of Kingzone, like you said yourself, they are a team where legitimately, not even just in this squad, each of these players looks like they could be the best in their role. Looks legit actually as an analysis.
So, if you look at like the dynasty team, their like period of rule, like. And also, the game didn't change that much back then. Like, when I think, like, certain dynasty teams, of course, they are well-rounded, and some teams are good for more than a year or two. But I think it's hard to expect Kingzone to be... And they've had, like, consistent member changes in jungle also. And I think jungle is a super key role. Like, with Peanut, Cuds, Crash, like, they've been very, very, like, switch-heavy in the jungle role.
I think also it's worth bringing up that I remember having a conversation in 2016, probably around MSI, where I talked to Emily Rand and we were saying if SKT didn't exist, we probably wouldn't think of Korea as like this, as an entity, as an entire unbeatable region, right? We probably think that...
Season 3 did so much to boost Korea's, like... I guess like standings, and like it got blown out of proportion just due to how good Faker was and how good SKT was.
We'd probably think that like Korea is better than most regions on average, but generally we'd see more teams like placing like occasionally like having more frequency of upsets in best of series. I think if SKT weren't consistently the major representative in teams like MSI and tournaments like MSI and IEM and stuff like this. So
I think it's combination of SKT being so good and the meta being stable for a while and mid being super important and like Faker just being that insane, and also how Monty romanticized Korea, and like Monty was like a spokesperson for Korea to the Western scene, and he did a lot of it in jest, and he also did mean some of it, but he would talk about it as in Korean overlords and like preface that with like the StarCraft domination from Koreans. Like everything just like was a perfect like storm for Koreans to be like upheld in such an insane way.
Sure.
Yeah, so I think that the Dynasty comment does work, because a lot of the times people ended up conflating regions with the teams that were just so dominant in the region for so long. Like, NA always jokes at international events because TSM was the team that shows up, right? And you had this idea that the team itself was just indicative of the entire region's strength, which I don't think was the case for most of the time.
Sure. I mean, by the way, probably the best example of that is a lot of people pick as the best SK Telecom the 2015 one, the one where they won and they actually
the modern one.
Yes, the one where they only dropped one game to Coup Tigers in the final. That was the only game they lost. Just remember that Worlds was the same Worlds where Coup Tigers lost twice to Flash Wolves and Orion beat KT Rolster in the group stage. So already, if you just take SK Telecom out, yeah, these teams were incredibly good and they still both had good placings, but they weren't like unbeatable. Like you couldn't think, oh, no one could possibly win a game off them. That was basically just SK Telecom people thought that about. So I think that's a fair assessment, all in all. I actually think, but if you want to tie it into our discussion before, I think the region that is the most hard done by in that sense is actually probably China then, because I think if you took all the dominant dynasty teams out, I actually think overall China was better than people gave them credit for. They always had like second and third seeds that did way better than expected, you know.
Yeah, and I think China also had probably the least outside of. They had the most upheaval in terms of dynasty teams shifting. Like you had situations where, even though EDG ended up winning playoffs all the time, they rarely were the best team in regular season, right? There was so many situations where, actually you go back and the most dominant regular season runs in the LPL did not, like the top three most dominant regular season runs did not end up winning the playoffs. They actually lost the first round that they played in playoffs following their runs. So it's pretty insane, to be honest. So I think that in general, like China has always felt more close, with the exception of like some of EDG's most insane placements or whatever. So they didn't necessarily lose, but they at least had 5-game series. Like the EDG dominant runs had 5-game series in their first round. So they almost lost. They were like 1 game off of losing in their first round. So yeah, I think that China has had like some of the most like close competition seasons of any region.
Sure. Well, actually, that's one factor then maybe I can ask you about, because if I think of all the famous dynasty teams from all the regions, like Loco was referencing SK Telecom, TSM, Fnatic in Europe, obviously you go in theory with EDG, WE from China, right? The mod quality I would say about most of them is kind of what you were saying there. Like they were always just, these are the teams that are the best in the playoffs. These are the teams that are the most clutch, that can close the game out, that have the players that don't get nervous. Because funnily enough, that's actually, I think, a product of the format of League, where you just have these 2 splits and it's all about doing well in that 1 week when you get to the playoffs, because the rest of your season doesn't matter. Whereas in games like CSGO is a good example, you can have teams that have been the best in the world that weren't the most clutch at all. I mean, we actually have had a couple of teams over the years, like we have a team at the moment called FaZe Clan that's just superstars, so they can blow everyone out the server and just win the game. They've actually lost loads of games that were like, you know, when they got into the close scenario, that's how you beat them. In fact, you get them into a tight game, and then because they have all the superstar players, they don't necessarily have the same cohesion someone else does. So I think actually in League, that's been the hidden quality. And if you actually look at most of the dynasties, I don't even think that you can say it's pure infrastructure in terms of like, you know, it wasn't like they had better coaching staff or whatever. The best quality every dynasty team has had is whenever they have an amazing player, they just keep the player, and the player never leaves. In general, I know Reckless left for 1 split, but generally Reckless is there the whole time. In general, You have Bjergsen stay in TSM. You have Faker stay. You have whoever Deft in the past. You have Clearlove. You have these players stay a long time. And that's really what I think caused these dynasties. You convince the players to stay. Whereas when a Huni leaves a Fnatic, it can reset the whole matter. When you have all these other players leave, the other teams that for a while were good, you start to see them fall apart. So it's actually a lot less sexy a topic when you lay it out like that, to be fair.
I think player mobility is good, but mobility for the sake of mobility is pretty bad.
One of the problems in League I've noticed with player mobility is that it's unlike other games, like in CSGO, for example, basically the players decide the team. And if you leave to go to join a team, it's because you know that's a team you want to play for. And if you join a team, it's because the players know they want you in their team. And there's a lot more mobility because we don't have a set like 1 year minimum you have to play. You can play, and then if it really goes badly, you could go in 3 months, like you have a lot more freedom. Whereas in League, sure, you have player mobility yourself, as in I want to leave, or a team can ask you to join, but you have no way to test if it works. You have oftentimes teams are actually half built by the org themselves, so I feel like it's just kind of a no man's land in League.
You're locked in for a year.
Yes, there's also no option to just quit, basically.
I think mid-split change, like between spring-summer changes, are really like make or break for everyone involved, for the team, for the player coming in, for the player leaving. Like, it's really difficult to have any kind of change middle of the year in League of Legends.
And that's why they're almost non-existent. To your point, because you said it's really difficult to have a change, because it's almost laughable, because the running for rookie of the split in spring could be like, oh, there are 12 rookies this split, and then in summer, oh, we've got like 3 guys we pulled out of solo queue because we were desperate. Yay, because there are no roster changes basically between spring and summer. It's just way too short of a time.
Right, Kelsey. So when China wins Rift Rivals, jokes aside, in theory, China's the best region in League of Legends, right?
I think that it's difficult to say, because I feel like the immediate gut reaction of anyone who has watched LCK for so long, which is more Western fans, obviously, than watch LPL, is that, oh no, it was a weird meta or all of this, but it's LPL also was consistently ahead in the group stage. Like, they were first seed in groups, and they won the playoffs. So it wasn't like a one-off game necessarily that completely decided, because if it was, okay, LCK is actually the first seed and Rogue Warriors upset Kingzone because Kingzone suck internationally, then I would say I would blow it off. But it's just, I think that because also LPL stuck to 80 carries more, they committed in general, like by and large, their team stuck to 80 carries way more. They feel more comfortable in a meta that changed a lot, and they are willing to do this type of thing. So I almost felt like, LPL teams had a better grasp on the meta. The meta suited them better, because it is way more focused on, oh my god, we don't understand our matchups. Let's just go mid and rub our faces at each other, which I don't necessarily think is what made RNG the best team at MSI. I actually thought some of RNG's macro setups were really underrated in terms of getting gold on UZI and stuff like this. But as regionally, LPL's approach is much more favored in terms of insane, sick outplays, like high talent, huge talent pool players coming together, stick to a particular style of play, have someone solo carry games. You can get away with more right now.
Oh, Kelsey, I wanted to ask this. So in Korea right now, it's very, like, one thing that League of Legends had huge for a while was it didn't lose any of its player base to other games, really. Like StarCraft 2, StarCraft 1 was dead. PUBG was not a thing yet.
Yes.
So it didn't lose any of the players. And then if you look at Europe, I think the biggest thing that League probably loses players to in Europe is Counter-Strike. Counter-Strike is huge all across Europe. And in NA, we actually lose it a lot to, not so much Fortnite in general, but like a lot to streaming. A lot of the better players in NA go to streaming. Some go to Fortnite, and some go to like there's just so much competitive option for NA. Even like Counter-Strike, Heroes of the Storm, Overwatch. Is there something that China loses its players to, or if you want to be a pro player in China, do you basically only have League of Legends?
So League of Legends has a huge advantage in that it's a tension game, because as a young player, if I want to play a video game, I only need my QQ number, which is ubiquitous if you want an email address, or if you want like instant messaging, if you want to talk to your teachers, you maybe have a QQ and you can use that as an excuse. Whereas you have to get like your citizen ID number from your parents to sign up for a game like Dota, for example, or anything like this. So actually League has an insane advantage. Tencent has put more investment in games like Fortnite, so that could change. But for a really, really long time, like China was not losing its player base to League player base to basically anyone, and there was a very good reason why this game was clearly the most popular within China. So,
because like NA and EU, I feel like it's really diluted in amount of players we have for amount of players we should have.
Sure. I think NA, that's more accurate, especially because I think in NA console games, like in the US, traditionally console games are way more popular.
The barrier of entry is super low for console games. Like you buy an Xbox, PS4 for what, like 200? And you can invite over your friends to play. But for League in North America, it's like what, 800 to 600 for a computer that can play League. Internet line, maybe that's more normal nowadays, and almost everyone has it. And you and your friends like have to like sync up and do that. Like the barrier of entry is so much higher compared to other regions and just other games, like you said, for console.
Yeah, I think that's also true of like the UK, and which Thorin can correct me on, and Japan. So like you would expect Japan, like Japan's in Asia with all of these cool gaming countries, like Japan should be super good, but I also think that
you play arcade games at Japan or
they're way more into arcade and our console than PC. So I think that these types of countries, like it's just the player base is diluted in part by that as well.
I think the UK actually has a weird one, which is that in the UK, first of all, because it's very, very famous that if anyone has the grades to, they all go to university when they're 18, because that's when we go. If you go to university, the internets are usually pretty bad. So people who are like PC gamers usually just quit, basically. They stop playing, so the interest dies there. Whereas obviously anyone can just keep playing on a console, there's no problem in that sense. And then secondly, if you come from like a poor area in the UK, so you're just someone who's lowest class possible, it's just way more likely that you're going to get like a console for your birthday than a proper PC, like a whole setup with a tower set up and full, it's just way more likely you're going to get a console. So yeah, games like Call of Duty, FIFA are going to be dilute the player base massively contrasted to the other games. And in fact, actually, I feel as though League might be the game in the UK that probably gets hit the most by that, because we still have a decent amount of CS players, even though we don't have many pros. But like, maybe it's also the UK mentality, because the UK people are pretty like hardcore in talking shit. So I don't think League's sort of the game that they'd be into, I don't really imagine playing like fucking Lulu's, like most people's gamers' idea of a good time, What about this then? So one of the weirdest parts about the Asian Rift rivals, as in the one that we actually care about, was the fact that the team that went undefeated here was KT Rolster. A team that, by the way, spoiler, it's not that they've secretly changed and they love the meta. Like, they're not even that good at LCK. Like, why is KT Rolster the one going undefeated?
So I didn't get to see KT's game in depth, but I watched a few of the KT games before, when they beat Griffins. I watched that one on stream.
One of the only teams to do it.
Yeah, and I thought it was so hilarious that they have Def playing stuff like Mordekaiser, because Def probably spent like Def is the most ADC, like the hard carry ADC that I know from Korea, because like in Korea, generally the teams and the meta have favored playing top carries and more utility ADs. If you think of really good Korean ADs like Prey and Ruler, they're actually very utility heavy and they're very good as utility carries, even Bang. You think like Bang, or you think Jin, Israel, Ashe, stuff like that.
Yes, of course.
And Def's just like this player that never had to deal with that shit. He didn't have to deal with it heavily, because during the time he was on EDG, he got to be like just absolute hard carry. He got to play Jinx, he got to play Twitch, and they were playing like what you were talking about earlier, just like, these players are getting funneled anyway. Def was playing funnel before funnel was a thing. And now, like, watching him play Mordekaiser and, like, die on Mordekaiser and, like, just have a miserable time on Mordekaiser, it's one of my favorite things about watching KT, how, like, some kid spent 7 to 8 years of his life, like, dedicating himself to playing hard carries, and then now he's just forced into this, and he doesn't want to get benched, and he's just playing these champions.
Adept was, like, actually one of the first ones in the pro scene to start playing a bunch of shit that just wasn't ADC, right? I remember, because he was one of the first ones that people in the West noticed were playing, like, Mordekaiser and Kennen and a bunch of other shit. And then the other funny thing is that my understanding is that Deft was told specifically to switch to ADC by staff or something because it suited his temperament, and so it's just really funny to me to see him suddenly, like, out of that from that perspective. But the thing about KT from Rift Rivals is everyone talks about, oh, KT went undefeated, it's such a travesty. Literally before the final, the teams that they played were, 2 of them were LMS teams, right? And they didn't play Flash Wolves, which was the only LMS team that basically won games at the entire Rift Rivals tournament. Like, all of the other ones.
Credits to Flash Wolves. Like, when your region is bad and you're the one team that's winning, like, you have to put in so much work.
All of the other ones, I think, didn't win a single game in the group stage. So, yeah, it was just Flash Wolves that won games in group stage. And then they played the worst LPL team because the way that Rift Rivals group stage was matched up was first seed matched up against first seed in all the regions. So KT got to play Rogue Warriors, which basically is the definition of mash your face at things and see what happens type team. And then they play IG and they get Aatrox first pick in the final on the day. And the game is, like, still not that one-sided. So I don't really understand the huge outcry of why wasn't KT played in the final, because if you look at their domestic play, obviously Africa has done much better domestically.
Also, one thing that people have to understand is, like, watching from the outside and watching these teams scrim internally all day and, like, talk, like, Korea will put out the best team possible, and the Korean coaches making the decision will probably have way better information than anyone, like, on the outside looking in.
Whereas Africa, I actually think their game against EDG was better overall. It was more clean. It was, like, more interesting to watch as well, and more thought out in terms of their draft and well balanced. So I think it was a good decision to play Africa in the 5th game. And I don't necessarily think that KT was the best team at Rift Rivals because they had the easiest schedule. So
I hope there's more Rift Rivals in the future, and I think, like, tournaments like this are absolutely required for League of Legends.
What about this then? So the one aspect that is the bright spot for Korea, obviously, is that because obviously even Africa lost some games here, so it's not like you can say it's just King's Own and blame them, you know. But the one upside is obviously back home they do have the Griffin team, which is just wrecking everyone and looks amazing and apparently isn't having problems with the meta. In fact, they basically embraced it from day one in LCK and it seems to be going pretty well. But that's also a team that surely has some of the flaws that some of these other squads have, which is they don't have the teams with players with international experience. So you never know when someone like that goes to an international tournament, could shit the bed completely. What do you think?
Yeah, there was always, like, a good, secure feeling of propping your legs up and sleeping when you sent SKT to MSI or to Worlds, even though they lost that one time at MSI. Like, you always knew, like, they were going to do well. I definitely don't know, and from what Riot said so far regarding bottom lane, I think they're somewhat okay with non-ADCs being in bottom lane and, like, existing. I didn't look up too much in detail how they feel about Funnel. I'd imagine they don't like Funnel, so I'm not sure what the meta is going to look like.
Yeah, they're explicitly patching Funnel out next patch by
That's good. That's
making
great.
it so that if you have a jungle item and you have the most gold on your team, you cannot get XP from lane minions. Yeah.
But doesn't that in itself fuck a lot of jungle stuff?
Not necessarily, because I think the gold that junglers actually get is pretty terrible. So if you're just playing jungle normally, it's sort of rare that you will get punished by this. And even if you're balling out of control, like your lanes will probably be pissed that you're taxing them in that situation anyway. So yeah.
I think, I mean, I'm not sure the meta is going to look exactly like this come Worlds time or come playoffs time, so I'm not sure where Griffin will place, and I don't think they're favorites to make Worlds at all.
Right, what about this then? So the other thing you wanted to discuss, Loco, was some of the roster moves, right? Specifically the NA LCS roster moves.
Mm-hmm.
So which is the first one that comes to mind? Is it the Meteos one? Is that one on your mind, mate?
Biggest one is C9 plus Meteos.
Okay.
I think all this was only possible because of academy teams. Like NA in general, like has been very, as we talked about, strapped for talent due to how little we get and how like good players and like how much value they bring. And like you talked about like how few good players are so clutch and they become super valuable. And without anyone to grow, it's really hard to replace and it's really hard to push the reason forward. In general, I don't want to, like, I guess, overly go into specific cases, but I think, like, these kind of upturns are what NA needs to consistently get better. I think it is going in the right direction. I think this is part of, like, growing pains of a region getting better.
Wait a minute. This is what I don't understand, because you made it super vague and say you don't want to talk about specifics.
Okay, we can talk about which ones do you want to talk about?
Because here's the problem. A lot of the moves, first of all, some of them were meta-related. Like, obviously, some of the shit that they did in the 100 Thieves was clearly based around what they wanted to do in the meta. So that one's not like a direct... It's not like they said, Meteos, you suck as jungle, get out. Like, you know, they had their own reasons there. But... Okay, what about that one? What do you think of Meteos leaving 100 Thieves? Isn't that a fucking blockbuster? It looks to me like they've just crippled that team completely.
I think Meteos was under the impression that there wasn't going to be any changes, and it would be really hard for them to make any changes from what he said in his interview regarding the two imports being like really important, like Ryu and Someday. But they made that change anyways. So if it's not a game decision and it doesn't make the team better, then it's like an outside a game decision, right? And I think NA being more and more okay with like making big changes and making like, because I think a year ago I can't imagine a player like Meteos getting benched or not playing like in summer split, like in this important of a split, and same thing for Sneaky, and that NA teams like consistently and like forwardly making these changes is like growing pains and steps to getting better and allowing like other players to take a shot at being on LCS, and LCS players being more and more, my spot isn't given and I'm going to earn it and I'm going to play for it every day. So I think that's why overall it is for the better.
Because Kelsey, the big problem I have with the Meteos one is, like, as Loco actually alluded to there, it's one thing if it just throws a 1-for-1 swap and they were like, we want a different jungler, this is the route we're going. But the obvious knock-on effect, which we talked about in the last episode, is that meant they had to get rid of Someday. And as a result, they took this fucking Brandini guy. And so now they're in this weird world where, so is Someday just not in the team? He was one of the best players they had, you know? What do you think overall out of this? Because as much as Loco, like, in terms of vague, broad strokes, I agree with him. The ability to, everyone can be replaced, you have to play field, that all sounds great. But in the specific case of 100 Thieves, it almost feels to me like they've cut off their nose to spite their face. They've lost Meteos and no Someday as well, or is he going to stay there and they're going to get rid of someone else? You know, how does this work?
Weren't they playing Onda earlier? Onda Someday?
Yeah, they were playing Onda Sunday. They're going with Onda Sunday, I think.
Okay.
So at Rift Rivals, obviously, they played Levi and Brandini. I think that was to give Levi some competitive experience. Okay. Obviously, if they went with the Levi Brandini, I think that has more to do with the fact that, well, our best jungle prospect is Levi, but he can't play on the roster with Someday, so we'll just give him a shot, you know, with Brandini and see how it goes at Rift Rivals, which is an event that ultimately doesn't matter at all if we go to Worlds, which is the international tournament that most people care about, you know? So we'll give him a shot at Rift Rivals.
You know how do it?
But I think the fundamental issue had more to do with Meteos than Someday, would be my my suggestion, and then based on what the statement was, which was that it was a cultural decision. And from what Medios has said in the past is that like his ideal team environment is like C9 with a group of friends, or even when he was on P1, he was like, I'm not sure how much I'm gonna play. You know, if 100 Thieves has a super serious environment, or if Medios didn't agree with Prawley's entrenched ideas of the game, I can see how they could clash on these aspects. And I don't necessarily think it's bad to bench a player for those reasons. It just sucks that player is Medios, because Medios is insanely good. So,
I mean, there's an initial net loss of Sneaky and Medios not being in LCS for the fan base and also skill wise. Sneaky and Medios, they're both really good players, but I think overall, like in direction of NA moving, like these kind of moves are required and are just gonna be there.
Let me ask you this then, though, Loco. Okay, so I'll even tie this to a very famous example you'll be aware of. So the C9 example for me is the most extreme one, because again, they implied it was because people had a bad attitude or they weren't playing the way they were supposed to be in the starting team. And so they brought up all these players from the Challenger squad, and the team was fucking terrible. They lost loads of the games, and what do you know? Magically, those players are coming back in. It reminds me of this Team Liquid team where they benched this guy Dardoch, and they were like, you know what? You're going to learn your lesson. We're going to bring up Moon from Challenger. Oh, shit, we're losing all the games. Dardoch, please come back. It's like he didn't learn anything, did he? Like, if anything, you probably made him worse. So doesn't the same thing happen here, Loco? Like I could totally believe that Jensen's telling them, oh, yes, coach, yes, whatever you say, I agree. I've learned my lesson. But like, come on, has he really? Like, that team was never going to do anything if they kept those subs in. So I get the point. Like, the principle's a great one, but in practice, it doesn't seem to work.
So if Moon was much better, or if Keith and
Golden Glue
and Snazore are much better, like these changes become more and more viable, right? And I think academy teams like genuinely raising talent and genuinely giving academy players spaces to grow will make these moves more and more viable in the future. I think the TL move wasn't as viable. I think currently, as you said, C9 move wasn't as viable, maybe more viable than the TL move, but as this happens more and more, and then as academy in place for more and more, and as scouting grounds happens, and the talent actually like rises up, and NA is able to grow its own talent, like these kind of things will be more and more the norm, and more successful, hopefully.
Because obviously it happens in Korea a lot. You get the subs even just when they lose a game in the best of three. It happens quite often, actually.
I think the way that they framed it just comes across as like insanely bullshit as well. Because they say that as the way that they explained it was that Reaper or whoever came to Jack.
C9 Jack.
Yes, excuse me. Came to Jack and said, this team doesn't make worlds, so I want to try the academy players, right? And puts the academy players in, and this team fails. Like, oh, well, apparently the entire premise upon which we base this is false, or something like this. We're going to put the old players back in, and we really want to make worlds. Maybe we make worlds. It just seems so disingenuous when they put out all this content, framing it that way, and then completely backpedal.
Yes, the notion that Reaper really thought they were going to make worlds with Golden Glue, etc., was obviously not even vaguely plausible. Like, I don't care what they saw in scrims. That just doesn't sound like even he believes that, really.
I don't think he was saying that he thinks that Golden Glue makes worlds. He just thinks that the Jensen roster doesn't make worlds, right? And so they play Golden Glue.
So as a result, better off to just take this moment to see if they can change the culture or something, or the attitude.
Yeah, something like that. So
I mean, obviously Jack should have just said, to be fair, Reaper, none of these teams fucking win LCS. How about I get your ass out of here and get someone else? No, obviously Jack would never do that, because Jack, for some reason, just likes Reaper. I don't know why. I mean, listen, I loved watching him in season 2 as well, but that was like 5 years ago at this point in time. So maybe move on. Maybe go and get somebody who can win. Just saying. Loco, are you friends with Reaper still?
Yeah.
Ever?
We've been more closer
right
this year than last year we've been closer.
Is he just cool with never winning? Is that just fine for him to always have a contender, always have wicked players, and then just be like, well, I lost again, well, that's fine.
I don't think that's my place to speak for him. Of course he's not okay with losing. Joker's okay with winning, but League is such a player-driven game, especially in NA. I think there are definitely times where a coach should be credited. There is a time where a coach should be blamed, but League is such a player-driven game. It's way more basketball than it is football.
Sure. Not a bad analogy.
And also, League fan bases are so attached to players. You know how the Cavalier franchise or Cavalier fan base is so attached to LeBron? League is like that for every single star player. They're so attached to the player itself, more so than like there are very, very few teams that have team fans. I think TSM and Fnatic are probably the only two teams that I could really say have, and probably in China, World Elite. Like these are the only like really three big teams that I can think. Like there will be, it doesn't matter which faces you put on these teams, there will be like team fans of these teams. But for almost every other team in the league, they're such player fan bases more so than team fan bases. Yeah. Even SKT, I would say, there's probably more Faker fans than there are SKT fans.
Plus, I can tell you, if you've ever watched any Korean like esport for a long time, if a team stops winning, like if SKT keeps being terrible now and having all these bad, you'll never find a fucking SK Telecom fan. They'll all be under a rock somewhere. Like when you go to the games, that cheering section magically disappears when the team don't win anymore. I'm telling you.
No, they're still there. They're just wearing different uniforms.
They're all mad like glory supporters. They'll just you'll have so many Griffin fans next year if they win LCK. I'll tell you right now. Even though logically you should have none. You
know how CJ is looked up as a joke? Well, they're non-existent now. They don't even exist as a league team anymore. But there was a time where CJ was like absolute height of popularity. Like
they had two of the best teams.
Of course,
sick.
It's crazy to think like in league. I don't think, at least for NA League, I don't think there will ever be a time where TSM and CLG and C9, these three teams, like the OG3, will be ever like a bottom like fan base team. But in Korea, like it happened, like where a team like TSM disappeared off the face of the earth, and like we never ever bring them up anymore.
Well, if anything, that's the best example, Loco, because obviously the one thing CJ did do for a long time is keep the fan favourites. They still had Mad Life and Shy who were getting voted into fucking all-star tournaments, but they didn't have that many fans at the games. I tell you, I went to some of those LCK games. There was barely anyone, but magically all the teams that were on top suddenly, like, the best obviously was when people like Samsung or even Orgs just magically had a massive fan base, like, and then didn't right after the extra. Oh, no one supports them anymore. That's weird. You've burned all those jerseys, have you guys?
Korea has a lot of that too, but NA also, like, you know, they're like, those are our boys. Like every team loves that. The American team, the America's team. Like in Korea, it's like super big into that. All the Asian countries, like the reasons are China. I bet they're really, really into like whoever's on top. And for like Taiwan, they were really into TPA, and then now Flash Wolves. Like those are our team. Like those are our boys.
Yeah, and especially because now RNG is an all Chinese team. Well, depending on your definition of whether or not you're Chinese or Taiwanese. Well, not just the coaching staff, but Karsa.
Oh, with Karsa?
Well, also depends if he's in the game. So
it depends if he's in the game because they have MLXG as well. But it's this like they love RNG, right? Yeah. So yeah,
I think that's one of the reasons why I think TL has a really good potential to be, for the first time in ever, like overtake TSM as like a team, as like America's team and like the number one team, because they have Double Lift, who is a like superstar in League of Legends, and they're all NA also. Yes. Or Impact. I guess is more Americanized. Where I even almost.
They also have Ola.
Oh my god.
I was really confused as to where you're going. Like the Double Lift thing makes sense because their star player is basically an NA
very
player.
American. TL feels very, very American. Overall.
Oh, but here's the thing. His principle does make sense because obviously TSM has 3 Europeans in their lineup. And crucially, I still feel like a lot of TSM fans hold back a bit of the love from their squad, not just because they're not winning, but because in a sick sort of way, they actually like it when TSM loses just so they can be like, see, Sven and Mithy weren't that good overall. Like, you know, in a way, they still get something even if they lose, Kelsey, which normally you don't. Like if that was Wild Turtle and someone else there, you just lose if they lose. Whereas they get to go, nah, see, EU best fucking shock. They can't make it in an LCS. Like, so they still, in some fucked up way, I think they like, until they win LCS, TSM's fan base is going to be like a little bit withdrawn, you know.
Let me
give all of their love.
let me help my point a little. The TSM roster with Spenskeren and Bjerg and Double and Bio and Hunter, they did not feel like a very American team. It felt like more international, and the fan base for it felt more international, where TL definitely feels more American team.
It does not to me, but like I would feel like TSM would be more, because you still have Double Lift Bio, and then on top side you have Hanser, and everyone was like super. That was also when everyone was super high on Hanser as well, right? And then there's this huge outcry that Hanser didn't get MVP because he was like the American top laner, right?
Yes.
And there was all this other stuff. So I actually feel like that was more of that. But I think the biggest thing with TSM is just that they are really low on content relative to a lot of the other teams. And by low on content, I don't necessarily mean, because obviously they have TSM Legends, they have all this other stuff, but they don't have, oh, these are our players like goofing off and hanging out with fans and being like everyday whatevers, but because their brand is very serious. I think that's more what would hold them back from, which is like really sad to say, because I feel like that was, for example, when WE had a very serious brand iconography that made a lot of fans like them in China. Like they really liked this idea that WE was super serious and super into the game in season 2. But in NA, I feel like that almost hurts you.
So I think initially,
from having a fan base. So
I think TSM had the biggest fan base because of two things. It goes directly against what you're saying, but like the approachability of the team initially, like the original Rainman, Reginald, Chaos, Dyrus, X Special roster was super approachable, and they put out more content than anyone else in terms of their vlogs, and they're the first one to move into the gaming house, and like they streamed so much. So they were very approachable going into like the Bjergsen era with me and Lust. I felt like TSM Legends was like super hilarious and was really fun to watch. And even though there were dark times, like the content was there and it was light and we were really approachable, and people still streamed a lot. Like Bjerg streamed a lot, Turtle streamed a lot. And then I think the last TSM roster, not this one, the one before that, was also very like fun. Like they were super jokey.
Really? I felt like they were moving way more towards like the we train all the time and all this type of like mentality, starting with the last roster.
I think it ended that way, and it was more gradual towards that way. But
maybe
when they remember that roster, it's more of people remember it also not just being good, but also a very fun roster.
Are you talking about the Hunter Double Lift Bio roster?
Yeah, Hunter Double Lift Bio. Spencer.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Because I remember.
You think they were just super serious? I thought
their image in 2016 was like, oh, no one has worked harder than us. Like, I won't put another roster through the same torture, the same hell, like this type of like
that was
sort
one
of
split, but
really over the top. I mean, this is the identity I think they were going for. They streamed less than other teams like at that level could have
for one
as
split.
well. And they specifically did that. I mean, yeah, but they did this similar approach in 2017, or yeah, it is 2017 is the correct year.
What do you think?
That's the thing. What Kelsey basically just said.
I would say you are a world-class expert.
That's the thing. I was actually going to say basically what Kelsey said, which is my enduring memory of 2016 was like this was supposed to be the one NA team that actually could do this really deep run at Worlds, because they've put in the Korean hours of practice. I even was going to mention this infamous line that Weldon Green said, which Kelsey just basically said word for word, where he was like, I won't do this again unless there's certain circumstances. I can't put my men through this. This is inhuman. And it's like, first of all, calm the fuck down,
I
Weldon
think
Green,
what Weldon said was
dial this down a couple of notches,
We're on along the lines of we work so hard, and there isn't as much reward, and we could be getting so much more for not working as hard and still winning NA and still like reaping other benefits of being a top team. that was an over dramatized version.
But he is an over dramatized person in a lot of ways.
Time to time.
Yes, he's a parody of himself. But then again, who might speak? Or you, Loco. Basically, only Kelsey's allowed to just pass judgment on this one, I guess. So,
yeah, but I love talking about legacy teams because teams nowadays change so much and they don't have the same kind of feeling as some of the previous roster, not just for NA.
Well, actually, Loco, let's talk about that then, because that's one thing I do feel like, beyond ignoring all the meta stuff, which obviously only came in the last couple of months. Before that, the first split was vaguely normal League of Legends, right? When we started this year, I have to say that's something I had the same feeling of, which is because of the franchising. NA LCS, every lineup almost looked different. Like all these core players were uprooted, put on different teams, and as much as I like that, in as much as it made you have all these different squads that were different, obviously Team Liquid now has a totally different feel. They should be one of the best teams. They should be a champion. But it has kind of like destroyed nearly all the narratives, I feel like.
No, I mean, everything's like reset. Like, franchise should have been a reset, or franchise should have been a continuation of a lot of what is great about League of Legends, like the approachability, the long-standing storylines, like player longevity, being able to, like, it was a game like you could always come back to and still have fun with friends. And pro scene changed a lot, meta changed a lot, like all the legacy teams changed so much. Like, there's some comments when you say it sounds crazy, but it's true. But like a comment like TSM is 3 out of 5 European now. The longest standing player on CLG is Darshan now. There isn't a single player from the original Cloud9 roster that's starting. Doublelift is on TL. Like, they're just, Immortals is not part of LCS anymore. There's just like so many comments. Like, you like write these 5 things down and you go back a year or you go back 6 months and then you give it to someone and it sounds absolutely fucking crazy. Like, fucking crazy. But it's true.
Yeah.
Like, Afro's not on CLG. Like, the longest standing member on CLG is Darshan now. Like, oh, it's so different. What about like in Europe in terms of change for 2018? How was it, Kelsey?
I would say there's a lot of change. Like, obviously G2 is completely different, and you have the only player that was retained is really Perks. You have H2K, which was an iconic lineup that broke up, right? Because you always had Odo on H2K, right? And then now Odo is on Splice, which was like kind of these plucky Danish kids who came up from the challenger scene and had a terrible first split and then went to Worlds. That roster is completely different, right? It's no longer that identity at all. So there were a lot of massive changes going into 2018 in Europe rosters and moves as well.
Fnatic at least stayed somewhat the same with Reckless and Perks, or Reckless and Perks. And
Reckless and Caps.
Oh yeah, not Caps, not Perks.
Yeah, and so as like Fnatic definitely stayed the most the same. That was their big thing going into the new split. It's Fnatic should be the best team because they haven't made any roster changes, like this kind of idea.
Korea also
outside of
changed so much.
So. But there were so many. Yeah, it was kind of funny because I feel like China changed the least. So even though they got franchising as well, and they're now at 14 teams.
In some ways, wasn't China the league that was almost closest to franchising in terms of how long stay some of the works were and how how rooted they were?
Only one team was. The way franchising was basically automatic. If you got in spring of 2017, if at the end of spring of 2017 you didn't get relegated, you're basically automatically in franchising. They reassessed at the close of the year, but they only kicked out Newbie. Newbie was the only org that was removed.
Wait, don't they also have games? Like, don't they also have teams in Dota? I feel like they're a pretty established org, no?
Newbie, yeah.
Yes, they're
but
one of the
Chinese orgs are really weird.
I remember
for a lot of
Dota
reasons.
team for like being around for forever, not just a league team.
But they've been around forever, but they were the only team that either decided not to go into franchising or wasn't accepted into franchising.
They also weren't remember, they weren't actually in league for that long. They were only in for what was it, like a year or something before that period of time. So to be fair, they came in
they bought the QG team at the end of 2015, I want to say, or 2016, excuse me. Yes. And then they moved in for a little bit.
Do you guys keep up with StarCraft 2 at all?
Not very much. I mean, it's a bit of a dead game, mate.
At the moment, no.
Okay. But StarCraft 2 had this period where it was initially really hyped and initially one of the most like on top of the game in the world. And the meta changed dramatically during Heart of the Swarm, where Broodlords just ruled everything, and Zerg was incredibly OP, and like things were really turmoilous for a while.
No, that was the end of Wings of Liberty you're talking about, yes. Heart of the Swarm was when they made the Broodlord and Infestor less OP.
Okay, but there was a period where meta changed dramatically, and it wasn't like pushed the right way, and I felt like StarCraft 2 took a huge dip during that
terrible,
era.
Yeah.
I really, really hope that isn't the case for League of Legends. I think League as a game, one of its core strengths is the community aspect and playing with other, and the social aspect, and how easy it is to get literally anyone to play League of Legends. And I'd imagine the number one reason why people start League is because your friends play League and they teach you League and you play with them. And probably the number one reason why people stop playing League is because your friends stop playing. And I think this is a very easy time for people to stop playing due to how much things are changing, not just in bot lane, in every single lane, in overall meta. And it's a very easy time for people to get lost if they don't watch competitive for a week or two, if they don't keep up with the game or two. And one person quitting isn't just one user quitting, it's one person quitting. All their friends are more likely to quit. And once any of their friends quit, any person that had those two mutual friends is incredibly, incredibly likely to quit. So like with Fortnite coming up, with Realm Royale and like other games coming up, with Overwatch being more and more active, with Hearthstone new expansion, I think it's a really easy time for League to lose its viewer base, and I hope like it can maintain its viewer base and Riot can go back to more like roots of what was competitive League of Legends and what was like League of Legends, like that was fun for everyone. I also love that they redo the tutorial. I think it can be better, but I think tutorial for League of Legends is super fucking important.
Now they have a quest for playing games with sub-level 15s, so there you go.
It's so hard to get new players into League of Legends, so it's super important that like we're able to retain players. And
I'm with you on the angle that like one of the biggest selling points clearly was like how incredibly easy it was to start the game. In fact, actually, you gave the example before. If you don't know the game, but you have two friends who play, you just play a normals game and you just play support, and then the AD carry sort of tells you in the game, like live coaching, like here, step forward, step, like you can at least get going without ruining the whole game for everyone else, especially because obviously at a low level, it's not like the support really fucking does much and it's solo queue game anyway. So, but I have to say that is one thing that is concerning, because as you mentioned, a lot of the games that come out now and are successful, like Realm Royale, PUBG, etc., are all based around instantly you drop in the game, you're having some sort of fun, you're doing some crazy shit, you don't have to know what you're doing. Like it's like basically you're getting all the short attention span people. Whereas if I came to play League now and I hadn't played for 2 years and I came into a game where people are doing some weird fucking meta thing and none of the lanes make any sense, if I'm only trying to play for fun, the odds that I bail after that one game have got to be so high.
Yeah. So you know how you guys are both my age or extremely older in one of the cases.
Still look fucking straight fire though, don't I? I have that face that just doesn't crack, Loco.
Okay.
I look the same for 10 years, mate. It's straight fire.
Okay.
I am somewhat Asian in that sense.
Maybe you're soulless.
Could be.
Anyway.
Could be.
So, like a few years ago, like RTS was the king. Like there was like this period of StarCraft or even Warcraft 2 leading into StarCraft, leading into Brood War, leading into Warcraft 3 with Command and Conquer. Like there was this period of time where RTS were the huge thing, and if you were a gamer, you played RTS, right? And then I think following that was like a really big MOBA boom with Dota, initial Dota, into Heroes of New Earth, into League of Legends and Dota 2, League of Legends and Dota 2 being like the real core games. I think like there's we're in the middle of a genre shift into a different genre. That might be Battle Royale, that might be something else, maybe it's another game that pops up, but I definitely feel a genre shift. I don't think there will ever be another popular MOBA. There will never be another popular MOBA. League and Dota 2 I think are the last of its kind.
Seems almost likely that's the case anyway, though, mate. I actually made a video on this exact topic, which is the reason why no one can ever predict the future of esports is that every single new number one game is nearly always a new genre. So people will naively think it's like a business, like, all right, to get to the top of this business, I just have to make a better car than that guy. It's like, no, you have to make whatever comes after a car. That's the problem, No one like before, it's not like someone's made, I've got the best horse. It's like, well, a car exists now, mate, so that horses are done. That's all over for everyone. So the problem is you can never predict that. So I agree. No one knows what's coming next.
I remember, like, the one I talked to someone who was in the Association of Chinese Esports, and his theory was that at least within China, what it would take to upset League of Legends would be something entirely different, like on a different platform, basically. So, like, this type of idea is like, and he was talking about VR or mobile games because, like, mobile games are getting increasingly popular, especially in China. So just this idea that obviously something will come out of somewhere, and this genre itself is just, or excuse me, the platform of gaming itself is just constantly evolving. It's really hard to have a game that you think will be around for 100 or 50 years or anything. Like this.
I actually could definitely buy. This might sound bizarre, but I could buy the idea that a mobile game could become huge. Because here's what's amazing, right? Is I won't say who does it because I don't want to out them. But when I go to CS:GO events, when some of the commentators and casters have, like, you know, they've got the afternoon off, they just had the morning, and some of them sit in the green room while we're watching the games, the ones that are working the event. Some of them play games like Arena of Valor, which is basically League of Legends on your mobile. And the whole reason they play it, but would never play fucking League of Legends on a PC, is because it's on a mobile, it's a lot easier, it's fairly intuitive, the concept's not that hard to understand, and you can just blast it out in 20 minutes. Like, these people would never play a fucking game of Dota 2 or League of Legends. You can never get them to do it. But in a mad way, if it can appeal to them, it can appeal to anyone, I reckon.
So I think
for sure, and that's why they became, like, popular. They specifically said what, like, Locodoco even said about League of Legends, which is that, like, women will play it, like, kids will play it, like, this type of thing. It just has an increasingly broader and broader and broader appeal.
So I think mobile games are the future also, because if you look at 5-10 years ago, to play and, like, sit in front of a computer and play, you were probably, like, on the older side. You were probably, like, older dude that was very, very nerdy and very, very social, geeky to play computer games.
Why you'd be on the computer,
Nowadays, like, for League and stuff like that, like, all the kids play video games. Like, every little kid plays video games. So that's why I think League succeeded, because it appealed to everyone that was playing the games. And as one thing that Kelsey alluded to, and Thorin alluded to regarding mobile games, there's more people in the world with a phone, with a smartphone, than there are more people in the world with access to good PCs that can game. So I think it's going to be a mobile game just due to how much more accessible it is. It needs to have depth, it needs to be easy to learn, and I think, like, a mobile game could, like, be the next biggest esports, like, be the most socially, be the most financially, be the most attention-wise, the biggest esports.
Plus, if you look, first of all, Chinese people are literally talking on their phone 24/7 whenever you fucking walk around. Like, you just keep thinking, who's he talking to? They always have that little mic that's built into the headset, which is really annoying. You can't, you can't always tell someone's talking.
Hello, and then, like that.
And then Korean people, because they commute all the time, like, literally every fucking ad on the Korean subways for a mobile game that looks like some shit fucking dungeon raid type game where it's always some woman with, like, a really sexy outfit, like, spinning around with a sword, killing 15 creeps at, like, once or something. It looks so garbage. Like, I would never play it. That's the thing. Like, an actual gamer wouldn't, but a random pleb would for sure. They'd be like, oh, that looks sick. Look at the graphics on it.
And it's super easy to market also based on that, because it's like, I have my phone, you know, and then, like, literally the phone ad pops up and you can play it immediately. Or you're like, I have a friend in China who works with esports companies to do, like, run promotional events, and it's super easy to do them for mobile games because you can partner with companies like Samsung, and it's like, if you win this event or if you do well in this event, we'll like, literally give you the phone that you're playing on. Or anything like this.
I want to say one thing, though. Thorin saying he wouldn't play it is actually something huge I want to talk about. I think back when RTSs were popular, the average age for the gamer was much higher. And then I'm 100% sure the average age for League of Legends is much higher than the average age for Fortnite. And I think Thorin is, like, 10 years ago, Thorin probably would have been a very good representative of what an average gamer looked like. I think now all three of us are too old to be a good representative of what an average gamer looks like. They're probably like 14-ish, 15-ish, been playing mobile games, iPad games, computer games, console games all their life. I think what we like is not going to be the norm. Like next time a change happens. So I think that's why it's hard for us to predict. And we have to look at like people much younger than us, what they're playing.
This video was kindly supported by Dean Tanglis, Gardner Wilson, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Alex Adams, Daniel Yordanov, TTMXMP, VeXii, HawpT, Robert Baxter, and Travis Greb, with a special thanks going out to Jerky's Minion. Want teasers for my upcoming content? To ask a question for my monthly AMA? How about taking part in a discussion with me about esports? Or perhaps you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Become a part of the Scrilluminati today at the Patreon link in the description box below.